Hi everyone. So in my first video, I talked to you a little bit about evaluating sources and how to figure out how to find a scholarly source and what a scholarly source is. In my video today, I'm going to try to do a little demoing of locating scholarly sources. And this is just a demo that's going to just skim the surface of this to get you started. But it's also about kind of figuring out what you're looking at in the library and how to go about this. So the first thing you need to do is you need a research question. A lot of people will start with a subject, but the stronger your research question or the articulating it as a question is really very useful. So in our first year writing seminar, the course theme is bridging differences. And so based on our readings, some of the questions I developed are, what is the role of anger in activism or fighting for social justice? And when is anger beneficial and when is anger harmful in bridging differences? Now in our class, we've been going broad because we're working with texts from different disciplines, from different subjects and sites of study, right? And so sometimes a broad question is helpful, but we're still probably going to have to narrow a little bit. So I'm going to start off with two search terms, anger and activism. So I'm going to do this both in Google and in the library. So in the library, I like to just start here on this big search bar. And my searching tends to be pretty simple. There are ways you can be more specific, but really we have a pretty good library search system here at Cornell. And so I think just being simple to start off with is a good idea. So this first screen you go to at Cornell is buckets of things that you can look at. So here we have a bucket of books. There are 2 books in the library catalog that meet this. But one is on Gloria Anzaldúa, and we read, or we didn't, but I often use a reading from her on this class. So that's good news. Articles in full text. There are 2,000 of those. And then down here we have digital collections and repositories. These are the 4 formats available. So that's the first thing you're going to see in the library. And to really do searching, I recommend that you all go to view the 2,000 articles in full text. While books are valuable and we should all be reading books, one of my big criteria for good research is that you can deal with it and use it as a perspective, right? So if your timeline is short, you don't have the time for a book, and you probably shouldn't waste your time searching them in the library. So for time's sake, but also for the sake of having a variety of perspectives, you're going to be able to use more articles than you can books, and that's going to represent different perspectives on a topic. So it's also beneficial just in terms of what you're capable of reading and reviewing. Okay, so when you click on this, we get to a list of what the library offers for these search terms as key terms, right? So I just want to kind of compare what we see in the library through Google. So in Google, when I use those same search terms, we also get some scholarly articles. And this is probably because Google knows me and Google knows that I often am looking for scholarly sources. I can tell that because I can see ScienceDirect.com is a database for scholarly research that the library subscribes to, ResearchGate.net, libraries at Rutgers. So we get a little bit of everything here. But on Google, we get probably maybe the author, we get the key term, we get the title, and we get the website, right? You might get cited by or related articles too. And there's ways to refine this, but the most useful information here is really the title. Going back to the library though, and I'm not against using Google to do searching. I think you should go back and forth between the two. But in the library, we do get a little bit more information. You're going to get a full title, emotions, feelings, and social change, love, anger, and solidarity in Black women's AIDS activism. We're going to get an author. You're going to get the journal it's in And this is valuable because this tells us that this is probably from women and gender studies. So in a journal title, you get a little bit of a sense of a discipline, usually. And you might get some key terms. So down here under fear, hope, anger, and guilt and climate activism, we get subjects. So climatology, social movements, fear, hope, guilt, psychology. And then in the database source, sociology source ultimate, that's the database. And then the journal would be social movement studies. So I don't know what discipline that comes from, but that sounds like useful given our search terms, right? So going back to Google, one thing you want to know about Google is when I come down here and I click on one that I liked, radical rhetoric, anger, activism, and change. I like this, of course, because I'm from rhetoric and composition as a discipline, so this looks kind of familiar to me. So I'm going to click on this. And here, when I'm using this through Google, this is sometimes true at Cornell, sometimes not, depending on if you've logged in or not. This takes me to a database, Springer link, and an abstract, and a little bit of a preview of the article. But I can't access it unless I pay for it. So one of the downsides to Google is that sometimes you can't access full texts of things when you're talking about scholarly articles. But this would be free if I found it in the library. So one of the benefits of Google is you get a different set of search terms, and Google can use your history in searching in ways that might benefit your searching. However, then you'd have to bring that text and those, I would probably bring the author's name and the title back to the library if I wanted to find this in our library. But when we're talking about searching and finding good sources, I'm going to primarily be focusing on the library website because I want you to kind of also learn how to use the library. So one of the first things I'm going to do as a searcher for anger and activism is I'm going to read through these titles and see what do I notice, right? So this is Black Women's AIDS Activism. It's a really precise site. Here we have climate activism. Let's keep going. The relationship between advertising-induced anger and self-efficacy on persuasive outcomes, a test of the anger activism model using the Truth Campaign. So we have a specific ad campaign they're looking at here. An experimental test of the anger activism model. Here we have persuasion in psychology, emotions in psychology. So this is from psychology, so that's interesting. So some of the things I'm noticing so far is that usually these are attached to a very specific site of study, a very specific set of data somebody is looking at. Climate activism, advertisements, Black women's AIDS activism, right? So the materials that the authors are looking at are usually more visible in the library. So one of my first tips is to really spend time reading these titles and trying to see where are you getting information from, what fields. Remember we said we had psychology, one of them was women and gender studies, educational research might start to come up, blending scholar and activist identities, establishing the need for scholar activism. And these are kind of all over the place right now. And part of the reason for that is that this is a really vague kind of search, right? I haven't done any refining over here using search terms. But part of the refining you have to do is here, and I'm going to come back to that next. But the first set of refining you should do is after doing some searching and reading through those titles, you also want to figure out what is my focus? Can I be more focused than anger and activism? How can I narrow and refine my search? And part of that might be skimming through these titles again and seeing what sites most resonate with some of the things we've been talking about in class. Honestly, none of these really resonate all that great yet, right? And that's okay. It just means I need to keep working on my search terms and narrowing my focus. So one way is to test out synonyms, but one of the other things I do is I figure out, okay, in our class, what have we read and what am I going to use in my paper? So one of the things we've read is Audre Lorde's The Uses of Anger. And so this is about divisions and anger and feminism and women's movement. But so that's where my question kind of came from. But what about if I wanted to also use George Saunders, who are all these Trump supporters, to look at political division and political polarization? So he's really looking at that division between the right and the left in our country. And so I could kind of look at anger and how that happens there. So this might help refine my search terms, but it might also refine my question eventually. So this is my starting question up here, but eventually I'm going to potentially evolve that. And this happens both through the reading that you're going to do, but it also happens through the searching you do. So as you search, you almost want to think about searching as kind of an invention strategy, right? You want to look for key terms, you want to look for disciplines that you're interested in engaging with, and you want to look for new directions that you can go. But also remember to come back to what you're doing in your class, right? What are you drawing on, and how can that information help you narrow a little bit more too? So I'm going to test out anger and political polarization in the library. This is still also pretty vague. I'm not super narrow at this point. I'm still just kind of figuring out what am I going to write about and what am I interested in researching and studying. So again, I'm going to spend some time, and on this video, I'm not going to go super deep into our list, but I would recommend that you spend time reading these titles for quite a while, because the first search you do is just like the library throwing everything at you. The library is not Google. They don't have a bunch of algorithms testing out what your personal interests are at all times. So as a result, this is them just throwing everything at you, right? So let's read through some of these and see what we get. Seeing red, anger increases how much Republican identification predicts partisan attitudes and perceived polarization. Subjects, anger, political parties, voting behavior, ideology, adulthood. That's all the information. Of course, if we clicked on this, we would also get a sense of, we'd probably get an abstract. But right now, I think, it's also okay just to spend time with titles. Like the titles give you quite a bit just from this little entry right here. Eruptions of popular anger, the economics of Arab Spring and its aftermath. So again, we're seeing a specific site of activism here. Cognitive and affective responses to political disinformation in Facebook. This is in computers and human behavior. Now that sounds super interesting to me, but it's not really related to my topic. I disrespectfully agree. The differential effects of partisan sorting on social and issue polarization. America's anger paradox. This sounds useful, but this is a news article, so we're not looking at a scholarly article anymore. I still might want to click this and skim it, especially since I have a full text here. It might help me continue to refine my question and my focus. But one way to kind of quickly narrow too is using your filters over here in the library. So since for our class, you need some scholarly articles, I'm going to just go ahead and click on peer review, see what this gets me. I'm also going to go down here though and do some of these other filters. So earlier when I went through here, I noticed that there's a lot of political polarization across the world. So given our class readings, I might focus this on the United States. So I'm going to focus geographical region. The rest of these might or might not be useful for you, but one of the things I'm going to suggest is super useful is right here, going to show more. This is show more filters. So in here, the big one is disciplines. And this is a super useful way to refine, especially at Cornell, because I think that a lot of our research here leans towards the sciences. And so if you're working in a particularly humanities-based field, you might want to come in here. And the ones I tend to use is I still go broad, but I try to capture the areas I think would be most useful here. So I'm going to go literature and writing, language and linguistics. And if you wanted something in psychology, you could go here, but that's not my interest right now. So I'm also going to include political science since I'm doing politics and anger. So now if I click on those and then search this, this is really going to narrow my search quite a bit. And this is even more true if you have more general search terms than I've even used. Or something a little, like a lot of topics will cross the sciences and humanities in terms of what research is available. And the science information is great, but it might be less valuable for you in a humanities writing class where you need a source to do a little bit different kind of work for you. Okay, so let's see what we have. Rousing the partisan combatant, elite, incivility, anger, and anti-deliberative attitudes. That sounds great. Political psychology. So we're still getting some psychology in here, even though we didn't pick that as a discipline. Subjects, anger, politics, elites, enthusiasm, guerrillas, emotions, and psychology, because emotions is a term that gets taken up elsewhere too. So you'll see that a lot of search terms will specify what is the field that I'm using to help me explain emotions. I disrespectfully agree the differential effects of partisan sorting on social and issue polarization. How emotional frames moralize and polarize political attitudes. Aversion, emotions, ethics, anger, social distance. Again, political psychology. Okay, so let's say I'm interested in this text. I think personally that this question and this search term probably needs a little bit more continued refining, and I would probably keep going deeper into here. I might even consider specifying a site. But for the sake of time in the video, let's just pick how emotional frames moralize and polarize political attitudes. So let's say I think I'm going to be really interested in this. When you click on any of these sites, this is still inside the library. You get a little bit more. You get the abstract. But for the sake of the video, I'm going to click on the PDF full text. I don't think it really matters because you're still going to get that abstract right here. Either way you go. But now that we have a text, we're not done. So this is definitely a scholarly journal, political psychology. And if I had doubts about that, I would probably Google political psychology and see usually they'll tell you. So if I went to political psychology here, well, I didn't even have to, right there it told me. Usually there's a little bit of about the journal. Here we go, about. So this will tell you a little bit about what the journal produces, who the audience is, and usually it will tell you if it's peer-reviewed or not. I'm not sure I see that here, but usually that information would be here. But you still get that this is an academic journal. It's in all of these library databases. So that's a way to kind of check if you're uncertain, but it tells you in the library, so you shouldn't really have to do that. But now is the time, once you have a source, to go back to our evaluating sources handout. Remember at the end of our last video, I said that these end three are the most useful for evaluating scholarly sources. So just kind of quickly run through these questions. What type of publication is this from? We already said it's a scholarly journal from psychology. That's useful to know. The next two, readability and connection to your purpose, though, are super important for how to evaluate a scholarly source. So first, readability. So let's just skim the abstract. Moralized issues such as abortion and same-sex marriage are some of the most polarizing and divisive issues in politics. These topics motivate political engagement but present a barrier to democratic resolution. Yet we know little about how some issues become moral issues and others do not. In this article, I argue that exposure to persuasive frames, particularly those eliciting anger and disgust, serves to moralize and polarize public opinion. I test these hypotheses across 3 experiments on emerging debates over food politics. The results consistently show that persuasive frames increase issue moralization and in turn facilitate polarization. All right, I'm going to stop there. So, can I easily read and understand the entire article? So this is just the abstract, but I am able to get through that abstract. If I really loved this source, I would probably skim through it. I would read the titles of the section headings, and I would pick a random paragraph and say, can I read this paragraph? And for the most part, this one does seem readable. In terms of readability, it's okay to pick an article that's a little bit challenging, but you have to be able to read it and summarize it in your own words. So if you can't write about this without stealing the text's language, it's okay to just throw it back and find another source. You always need to be able to read it. Even if it's a little bit challenging, you still have to be able to summarize it. So we decided we can read that, so that's good. What about connection to your purpose? So how will this source further your own thinking and project? How will you use it in your essay? Okay, so now one of the reasons I clicked on this source is that it kind of seemed vague in a way that could be broadly useful. But when we read through the abstract, we say that this is debates over food politics, and that's pretty far from our class topic. But it's also about how persuasive frames elicit anger or disgust, not about how anger works in activism or in the world of bridging differences. I get the sense this might be about how something like advertisements use framing language, perhaps, to elicit particular responses or responses that end up being negative in the long run, right? Something like that. So that's a big no. This is unrelated in 2 big ways to our topic. So that's a bummer. So that just means I have to go back to my searching and continue to go through the library search, maybe continue to refine my topic and continue to look through these titles. Again, we didn't go very far. I'm just kind of modeling how to do this searching and what to be doing as you do it. So I'm not going to spend the time to really dig deep into this, but there's a few big tips I want to leave you with. Again, start with a research question. Actually write out the question. This will help you for your search terms. This will help you for your writing. This will help you in a lot of different ways. Next, really read the search results. So I did this through the video and it probably was a little bit dull to sit through, but there's no way to model research other than really reading the titles, the key terms, other basic information you get from the search. You'll notice I didn't really read abstracts until I got to the evaluating the sources. That's because there is so much information in the titles, the key search terms, and like if there's a listed academic journal it's from, that gives you a lot of information. Also, read deep into the search terms list. Don't just focus on the first 3 to 4. I did this in the video for time's sake because I don't want to make you sit through me reading through 20 and 30, but at the very least, I could come back here and say, what happens at the bottom? Chinese village, socialist state, rebels yell. I could kind of see where does this search end up going? And where it ends up going is a lot of me rethinking my search terms if we come back to here, right? It doesn't end up looking like it goes very far. Use titles from your search to help you come up with synonyms and or narrow your search terms. So again, I didn't really use synonyms too much here, but I went back to our class readings. But you can also go through and use synonyms from this, or use the words you find in titles that seem useful, right? I've had a lot of students over the years who did political division here instead of polarization. But then through the searches, they found out that polarization was a key term, that this is how academics talk about political division, right? Political division might work in Google, you know, and for your non-scholarly sources. But you might want to just change it up a little bit to see what else happens. And then the final one is use those filters in the library. In particular, I'm going to go back and show you this one because it's not easy to find. This used to be out here, but it's no longer. So they give you these big filters here. But if you go to show more, you're going to get these disciplinary filters. And this is going to be super useful for you in searching the library. Hopefully this was helpful. My final piece of advice that's not listed on here is what I did here is I'm tracing my thinking. I'm writing down my questions. Eventually I would have to revise those questions. I'm writing down my search terms. Because when I work with students who are doing research, one of the things I ask them if I meet with them is, what are the search terms you're using? And you should be able to produce a list, you know, to have multiple terms that you've tried to come up with. And that might mean, again, going back to the readings, using synonyms, using your searching, going to Google. If I'm really stuck, I go back to that Google search and try to find, how are people talking about this, right? So use your searching to help you do that work. Good luck with your research.